this was mostly a personal exercise for me as kind of this creative outlet that I hadn't had while I was being a working adult in a corporate job. But I must have had so much pent up creative energy in me because this book just kind of poured out of me. Like I opened a blank Google Doc and, 6 weeks later, there was a draft of The Teller of Small Fortunes. And then I decided to try and see what it would take to get it published, learning about querying agents, learning about going on submission, all that stuff. And I just kept trying to expect very little. And at every turn, I was extraordinarily lucky and, things worked out. And I got a great agent and I got a book deal and it came out. And so I almost feel a little bit like a fraud saying this because I hadn't been working at writing for a really long time. This wasn't my, sixth book that I was trying to write. I hadn't been taking workshops or classes. I was just doing my thing in finance and tech. But then when life threw me this curveball of my dad getting sick and I was thrust rudely out of my carefully planned career, that was when I finally had the time and the mental energy and the space to give it a hand, this sort of creative endeavor. And I feel like even though I hadn't really been working on writing actively, just by virtue of being a really active reader and reading constantly and reading widely as much as I can, that sort of was the head start for me in terms of writing. Because I do think that reading is writing in a sense. It's the inverse of writing, and you learn by osmosis what good looks like and what makes a story resonate with you. And so very long answer to your question, which is writing only became a real passion for me and something that is a part of my life in recent years, in 2022 and beyond. And it's really only because my dad got really sick and I quit my job and kind of had the chance to explore a whole different path.
What is up, everybody? You're listening to episode 175 of SFF Addicts. I'm your host, Adrian M. Gibson, and welcome to your weekly dive into the world of science fiction, fantasy, and writing craft. Joining me this week is my co-host, my bestie from the Midwesty, queen of my days, Greta Kelly. How are you, Greta?
I'm good. How are you doing, Adrian?
I'm doing very well, thank you. And if you want to support the queen of my days, you can go check out her book, The Queen of Days, but also The Frozen Crown and The Seventh Queen. If you want
Just all the things.
Just all the things. Support that beautiful woman and her family.
And of course, you can go check out Adrian's book, Mushroom Blues, for your daily dose of murder, mystery, and mushrooms wherever you buy books.
And lastly, you can support our other co-host, MJ. Go check out her book, Among Thieves, or book 2, Thick as Thieves, if you want to support her cats, because they're hungry. They're more fur than fat. So feed Thorn and Evie, please, and thank you. As well, a quick note for listeners, you can support SFF Addicts on Patreon for a ton of cool extras like bonus episodes, author readings, and more. So check the links in the description to help us do what we do here. Also, don't forget to rate and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app and subscribe to the FanFiAddict YouTube channel where this and every other episode of the show is available in full video. And just a quick shout out to our newest patron on Patreon, Herman Sternagel, contributing at $40. You are an absolute fucking gem. Thank you so much, buddy.
We love you.
And now, welcoming to SFF Addicts for the first time, Julie Leong, bestselling author of The Teller of Small Fortunes, as well as the brand new The Keeper of Magical Things. Welcome, Julie. How are you today?
Thank you, Adrian. So excited to be here. Thank you and Greta for having me.
An absolute pleasure. Before we dig deeper into the episode, a quick word from our sponsor. Poe Targe's job was to stand at attention and look good in a uniform, unless someone earned themselves an ass-kicking. He spent years climbing the ranks to be a master sergeant in the Sorrento Royal Senate Guard, and now he has the top-tier gig. He's guardian to High Senator Sarah Brand, one of the leaders of the planet Sorrento. Life is going pretty good for Poe, and he's looking forward to a future of settling down and retiring from service. But all that changes when High Senator Brand receives troubling news. Shattered is the story of doing the right thing and the consequences of those actions, following Poe Targe, Sarah Brand, and their friends as they struggle to keep their planet safe. Shattered, a Sanguine Stars novella, is a short, action-packed science fantasy read that features political intrigue, fun action, and a touch of humor, all while setting the stage for everything to come in this universe. Visit nicholaswfuller.com to get your digital copy today. And now, enjoy the rest of this episode of SFF Addicts. Just to get things started, we're going to do a little introduction, go a little bit deeper for listeners who aren't familiar with you. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you mentioned, I am the author of The Teller of Small Fortunes, which was my debut that came out last fall. It is a cozy fantasy about an immigrant fortune teller. And my next book, The Keeper of Magical Things, is coming out in a couple of weeks, set in the same world, but different cast of characters. So I work in tech full time as kind of my day job, and becoming a fantasy author has been sort of the fulfillment of a childhood dream that I never really actually thought would be possible. And so that's been really exciting. I live in San Francisco, California with my partner, my fluffy rescue dog, and a bunch of citrus trees in the backyard. And I'm a lifelong nerd. So
Love
big fan of
it.
you guys.
Well, tell us about all the nerdiness, your nerdy origin story. I mean, what started that dream that you had? Was it a book, a movie show, a game that really got you hooked on science
Oh
fiction and
God, I
fantasy?
don't even know where to start, Greta. I feel like the story of my childhood can be told through just increasingly nerdy artifacts. I think some of my earliest book memories that I have were hiding under the piano when I should have been practicing piano, and instead just like reading through all these bent, dog-eared, stained paperbacks. So books like Robin Hood, The Three Musketeers, and Ivanhoe were just absolute favorites for me. And this is like a deeply embarrassing childhood anecdote, but I imagine probably relatable to a lot of you guys. So we had this recumbent exercise bike in the living room in New Jersey. And when I was home alone, which was fairly often, both my parents worked, I would pretend this exercise bike was like my noble steed, this like charger and stallion that I would ride into battle. I'd be wearing a towel around my neck, have this like old TV antenna that was like my lance and my sword, and I would, be vanquishing the enemies of my living room. And you can probably see where those influences are coming from book-wise, but I was also always into computer games. So we had an old desktop in the basement, and I grew up playing games like Civilization, Age of Empires 2, Heroes of Might and Magic, all good things, lots of swords, lots of magic and sorcery, and good heroes and evil villains. And so that was kind of my upbringing, is getting to pretend I was one of these little pixelated knights, or like Robin Hood and his band of merry archers. And as I grew up, that sort of didn't really change. Discworld novels, I think, were basically my moral upbringing as a teenager. I feel like a lot of my personal philosophy comes from Terry Pratchett. Um, Tamora Pierce, Alana the Lioness. That was a good change because I got to, instead of pretending to be Robin Hood, got to pretend to be a girl knight, which was, useful. Yeah, so badass, so good. And then, I grew into books like Robin Hobbs, Lois McMaster Sturbridge Olds, obviously Tolkien, etc. Um, and yeah, I've played basically every MMORPG that has ever existed. Humble beginnings, starting with Neopets, as some of you
Oh,
might.
deep cut.
Deep cuts,
Holy.
yeah. The fairy paintbrushes were a deep currency of my upbringing. I had a dangerous RuneScape phase. We don't talk about that. At
What
one
happens in
point, I
RuneScape?
discovered text-based muds, went down that rabbit hole. So yeah, hopefully my nerdy bona fides are there and apparent. But yeah, I've been kind of on the fantasy, sci-fi, nerdy game train for a very long time.
Not just like apparent, like fucking off the charts, you know? Like speaking like so many deep cuts to childhood with like Neopets and RuneScape and everything. And the
Yeah.
fact that Pratchett was your moral compass is just like,
I mean, if
girl.
Pratchett were everybody's moral compass, I feel like the world might be a better place.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true. That should be like standard reading in schools, is just to read
Moral
Pratchett.
philosophy. It's like, Hobbes, the Marcus Aurelius and Terry Pratchett. That's all you need.
Yeah. Like Pratchett, just Pratchett as like a moral staple. And also they should just replace that Hobbes with Robin Hobb. You know, that would
Ooh,
be-
yes,
yeah.
that'd be a great class.
Come on, teachers out there. Are you listening?
Someone
Make it
get
happen.
And you mentioned earlier that you work in corporate finance and like strategy and stuff like that. So when did writing become a passion for you, and like how did you fit it in with such like a busy day job kind of schedule?
Yeah, for sure. So writing was really kind of this unexpected detour from the rest of my life. I'd always loved books and, sci-fi fantasy, like I mentioned, but I'd never really thought about writing as a career, for most of my life, actually. I'm the daughter of immigrant parents. They came here from Malaysia when they were really young. And so one thing that's kind of always been drilled into me and my sister is, go get a good education, go to a good school, get a good job, build a stable career, save money, all those things. A creative career is never something that I really viewed as like practical or even really as a realistic option. So, I went and studied like economics and political science. I went into finance and then I went to tech. And I'd been doing this corporate thing for most of my adult life when in 2022, my dad actually got really sick. He was diagnosed with late stage cancer. And I quit my job. So I was working for Google at the time, their self-driving car division, and I'd been there for a couple of years, but the doctors were telling us that my dad, that they thought it might be terminal, that it might be a matter of months. I do want to say, by the way, it's a happy ending. He's in remission. He lives across the street. He's great now. So, a happy ending to that story. But at the time, it was kind of this, big, scary news for my family. And I decided I would not regret quitting my job and quitting that stable career just to spend some more time with him and kind of help care for him during that. And there's also during COVID, which, the world is ending all around us. And it was during those 6 months when I was going to the hospital with him, waiting in the infusion room waiting rooms, and just kind of not working and not studying for the first time as an adult, that I had all of this free time that I didn't know what to do with myself with. And I didn't want to be thinking about all the dark things happening around me. And so I turned to books, as so many of us do, for kind of comfort and escapism. I was binge reading like all the sci-fi fantasy, reread all the Discworld books again for like the 12th time.
Gotta catch up on your Pratchett philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah. No, when everything's going wrong, just read Pratchett. You'll be fine. But I was reading new stuff too, and like this new emerging subgenre of cozy fantasy. And I kind of ran out of that specific category of books that I wanted to be reading at the time, because I was going through a hard time and I wanted that kind of comfort and magical escapism. And it occurred to me then, I was like, why don't I just try writing my own? And so this was mostly a personal exercise for me as kind of this creative outlet that I hadn't had while I was being a working adult in a corporate job. But I must have had so much pent up creative energy in me because this book just kind of poured out of me. Like I opened a blank Google Doc and, 6 weeks later, there was a draft of The Teller of Small Fortunes. And then I decided to try and see what it would take to get it published, learning about querying agents, learning about going on submission, all that stuff. And I just kept trying to expect very little. And at every turn, I was extraordinarily lucky and, things worked out. And I got a great agent and I got a book deal and it came out. And so I almost feel a little bit like a fraud saying this because I hadn't been working at writing for a really long time. This wasn't my, sixth book that I was trying to write. I hadn't been taking workshops or classes. I was just doing my thing in finance and tech. But then when life threw me this curveball of my dad getting sick and I was thrust rudely out of my carefully planned career, that was when I finally had the time and the mental energy and the space to give it a hand, this sort of creative endeavor. And I feel like even though I hadn't really been working on writing actively, just by virtue of being a really active reader and reading constantly and reading widely as much as I can, that sort of was the head start for me in terms of writing. Because I do think that reading is writing in a sense. It's the inverse of writing, and you learn by osmosis what good looks like and what makes a story resonate with you. And so very long answer to your question, which is writing only became a real passion for me and something that is a part of my life in recent years, in 2022 and beyond. And it's really only because my dad got really sick and I quit my job and kind of had the chance to explore a whole different path.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad that your dad's doing better and you're kicking ass at writing. So there's that.
Thank you.
But you mentioned that you had just had this outpouring of creative energy go into your first book, The Teller of Small Fortunes. But where did the idea come from? Obviously, did you have it like simmering in the back of your mind for a while, or did it just kind of emerge?
I think closer to the latter than the former. So when I opened that blank Google Doc, I already knew a couple of things. I knew I wanted to write a fantasy because that is near and dear to my heart. I knew I wanted to write something warm and cozy and comforting because that was what I was craving. And I knew also that I wanted to write the kind of fantasy that felt familiar but fresh at the same time. And familiar in part for that nostalgia and that comforting sense, but fresh in that I wanted to write a fantasy with a character that looks like me, to be frank. I've read a lot of classic fantasy and I love so much of it. But growing up, I always had this issue where the main characters were like, white princes with blonde hair and blue eyes on their noble stallions. And there wasn't a ton of fantasy, especially back then, that had characters of Asian descent. And especially, I didn't know very many fantasies that explored kind of the immigrant experience that I'd had. So I grew up in suburban New Jersey as the daughter of immigrants. At one point, I lived in Beijing. And I've always had this feeling of being caught between two worlds. And And I wanted to see a character like myself in a world that still felt nostalgic and familiar and comforting in the way that classic fantasies have felt. And so that was kind of just the sketch of what I knew I wanted to write. Everything else I let kind of come about organically. And so the very first thing I wrote down in that blank Google document was actually the title, The Teller of Small Fortunes. And that's because I think I had this nugget of an idea of there are so many epic fantasies about these prophecies, about saving the world and defeating the villain and the Dark Lord. And I love those so much. But in order for it to have something kind of cozy and comforting, I wanted to kind of shrink it down to a really small scale and play with this idea of what if those prophecies were like everyday little prophecies, the small fortunes. And so that was the first thing I wrote down. And then the character of Tao was kind of just, she revealed herself to me as I was writing it. And a lot of her experiences were drawn, I think, from my own kind of personal pent up childhood thoughts and kind of the desire to see certain kinds of representation. And so the rest of it was kind of exploratory, and I let the characters in the story tell themselves a little bit before I then went in with a scalpel and tried to make it into something, readable.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's dig into that a little bit deeper in terms of like because like you're talking about the epic fantasy and like big stakes and everything's on the line, the world is on the line, there's the big evil villain, all this kind of stuff. But can you talk a bit more about what drew you to write cozy books with The Teller of Small Fortunes and then expanding that with The Keeper of Magical Things? Like, what about it really appeals to you?
Yeah. So I think this is kind of a reflection of what the world felt like to me when I was writing it. And so it really was a case where when I wrote The Teller of Small Fortunes, I wrote what I wanted to be reading more of at the time. And so I mentioned that I discovered cozy fantasy as a genre, as many of us did, sort of during this period. And so I'd read books like Legends and Lattes, Travis Baldree, The Very Secret Society of Regular Witches, Sangu Mandana, Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I basically reread all of T. Kingfisher's pantheon of the Fate of Steel book. It's so good, so warm and musical. Yeah, so such a stan. And like the Tim Rare books. And so these books were giving me what I was craving, which is a sense that everything's kind of going to be okay. People are ultimately mostly good and they mostly mean well. And I, don't need grimdark, especially during that kind of period of time. And so this was a reaction to looking for the opposite of that. When the world feels grimdark, you want cozy. And maybe when the world is boring, maybe you want epic and adventure. And for me, this was very much everything else in my life feels dark and forbidding. Let's go find reminders in fiction of the bright spots. And so that is what I wanted to be writing, and that's kind of the genesis of why I started out in cozy fantasy, even though I also love epic fantasy and all these other subgenres, and hopefully I'll get to write in those later down the line as well. It just felt like the right thing to be writing for me at the time, for the world at the time, is, hey, even when everything's falling apart, there are spots of good too.
Definitely.
Well, I mean, speaking of the world feeling grimdark, the debut author experience can often sometimes feel fraught for people. But I'd love to hear a little bit about yours. Like, in hindsight, how was that for you?
That's such a great transition, Greta. I'm not sure I've ever heard the debut experience being called grimdark, but
I debuted in 2021, so for me it was grimdark.
I mean, we hope that everyone has a cozy debut experience, but the trend seems to be leaning towards grimdark.
Oh goodness. Yeah, no, that is very fair and an apt descriptor. Being a debut is weird, guys. I'm sure you know this, but I think especially the publishing world is just so opaque that you don't really know what to expect going in. And so I think the trick is expect nothing, and then anything good that happens will only ever pleasantly surprise you. And so I tried to keep that in mind. Obviously, it's hard because being a debut, you often find community with other debuts. And there's such a wide range of experiences depending on what kind of publisher you're at, indie versus big five, how big of an advance you got, whether or not you're getting marketing and publicity investment, even just like geographically where you're based. All of these things kind of boil together it's such a strange world in that you have such little control over so much that impacts how your book's going to do. And I think for a control freak like me, letting go of that and accepting that is like kind of a challenging thing. I come from finance and I'm like, if I can just build spreadsheets and do all the things right and get an A+ at being an author, then, this should work out. But you have to kind of accept that that's not the case. And so much of this is up to luck and timing and whether the right person picks up your book at the right moment. And so I think kind of embracing the futility and the chaos and the randomness of it all can be healthy. So I say all that to express that, being a debut is kind of stressful and overwhelming in those senses, and that loss of control can be a particularly anxiety-inducing thing. But I also want to say it's actually been really wonderful in many other ways. So I think my favorite part has been getting to build community and friendships with other authors, both debuts and non-debuts, like having established authors read my book and say nice things about it. And those are authors that I've had on my shelf for years and years. Is just the coolest feeling in the world. And, I can look at my bookshelves now and point to like 80% of those titles and be like, I know that person. I met them at Worldcon. I had dim sum with that author. And that's just so unfathomably cool to me. I can't stop, fangirling over getting to call so many amazing authors my peers. And that's something that I'd never really dreamed of, a couple of years ago when I had never really dreamed of becoming an author myself. So on the whole, mix of good and bad, more good than bad for sure. Wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah. And just saying, for anyone out there who is like Julie, I mean, I would put MJ into this category as well. If you're a fan of spreadsheets, Self-Pub is going to welcome you with open arms. All the control freaks out there.
What if I like spreadsheets but hate Canva?
I mean, I don't use Canva, but
okay.
I'm a Photoshop man. But
okay. Yeah.
So I'm like Canva plus. But if you do hate Canva, then figure out a way to finance a freelance designer. I don't know. there are certain things you could do, or get a friend who's really good at Canva and be like, "Yo, help me make some marketing shit here and there."
Got it. Good advice.
But Self-Pub is always an option for the control freaks out there. I want to dig into your newest release, The Keeper of Magical Things, which is out now. For anyone who wants to go support Julie and her little furry friend, her dog, go buy that book because it's fantastic. It's really, really fun. We're excited to talk more about it. I just want to ask you for a brief pitch for our listeners and viewers before we get into it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so bad at brief pitches. Hopefully I can keep it brief enough.
Elevator pitch, Julie, putting you on the spot.
All right. This is going to be a long elevator ride, Adrian.
I'm here for it. Like 100 floors. Let's go.
Okay. So The Keeper of Magical Things is a standalone sapphic cozy fantasy. It is set in the same world as The Teller of Small Fortunes, but with a completely different cast of characters, so you don't have to have read Teller in order to read Keeper. It is about Certainty Bulrush, who is a novice mage in the Guild of Mages, but she's been stuck at the novice level for years because her magic abilities kind of are pretty weak, don't really stand up to her peers. Her peers all have, elemental magic, harvest magic, battle magic. All Certainty can really do is talk to inanimate objects and, occasionally convince them to make very small tweaks. And so that's pretty useful for things like doing the laundry, but not a whole lot else. And this makes her pretty stressed out because her whole family, who are farmers, pear farmers specifically, are depending on her to become a mage and help send back money to fund her brother's apprenticeship and her parents' farm. But she gets her opportunity when it turns out that the Guild of Mages has been stockpiling just a few too many magical artifacts. And as we all know, too much magic in one place can cause some problems. And so chaos happens, and they assign to Certainty, because of her unique talent, the assignment of taking a whole bunch of these minorly magical, unimportant magical artifacts out of the guild and to somewhere safe, remote, out of the way, somewhere extremely non-magical, a farming village called Spelling. But she's not allowed to go alone. They pair her with a proper mage, Aurelia Morellin, who is a fancy, highborn overachiever mage with a lot of magical power and is basically Certainty's opposite. And she's also, annoyingly, very pretty, smells good.
Just the worst.
Hijinks ensue. Certainty tries to save her magical career. Magical artifacts cause problems. There are cat dragons. I would basically describe this book as Stardew Valley meets Warehouse 13 with lady mages, a dose of the spell shop. It's a book about community, about whimsy and magic, but it's also a book about living up to your own expectations instead of everybody else's.
Oh,
that was a
great
fucking
elevator
good
pitch,
The
Julie.
elevator is at the 60th floor.
Yeah, I love how you threw in she smells good.
And she
I mean, it's important,
So inconvenient.
I mean, that
Certainty
has
is so fun as a character, though, and like I found it really compelling that she wasn't born into power, because we're very much in an age of like everyone's a warrior queen and
Mm.
this, that, and the other thing. But she is from a rural farming family. Her family grows pears. So what went into creating Certainty as your main character, and why was it so important for her to be coming into this magical guild? It's like maybe a little bit of an outsider, or at the
Yeah.
very least an underdog.
Yeah, totally. So I will say I am a bit of a cheater when it comes to creating characters, and I like, basing them on things that I know personally. And all of my main characters so far have been, at least in part, created by drawing on facets of myself and my own experiences. So, like Certainty, I grew up feeling like an outsider. Like I mentioned, I was, an Asian American growing up in suburban New Jersey. I always felt like I didn't quite belong. And then in high school, I actually moved to Beijing, China, and I was all excited because I was like, oh, I'm going to be in a place where everybody looks like me and eats foods like me, etc. Turns out I didn't really fit in there either, because being Chinese American is a different thing from being Chinese Chinese. And there I was too American, wore skinny jeans and listened to Green Day. Um, yeah, it really marks you out when you're there, or at least awkward, 13-year-old Julie felt that way. And then after that, I went to Yale for college, and I grew up pretty middle class, and so I was feeling like this awkward, unpolished, ugly duckling compared to my classmates there who'd gone to prep schools and grew up wealthy and knowing like which tiny little salad forks to use, um, which in part inspired Aurelia too, right? But like I feel like I've spent my whole life sort of looking from the outside in and having characters whose stories mirror that in a way and have arcs where they also feel like outsiders and feel like the need to prove themselves and the need to belong is just something that comes more easily to me than writing a character who comes from a place of privilege and, the high-born prince who has the duties and the responsibilities of the kingdom thrust upon his shoulders just because of who he was born to. I also just frankly, and this is a biased point of view, but maybe I feel like those kinds of characters are more interesting to me to take the small characters who might be a side character in somebody else's book and elevate them to the position of being the leading character and the hero in my own.
Yeah, that's really cool. And like, yeah, you saying about all the kids that you went to university with at Yale, and like that as inspiration for Aurelia, it's kind of like, yep, that tracks. That definitely tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
But I like this idea of like outside looking in, because there's also inside looking out, right? And
Yeah.
and having this book, so much of it from Certainty's perspective,
Mm-hmm.
there's kind of like this imposter syndrome that she feels being at the school. And MJ was actually brought up a book by Garth Nix called Lirael, where the main character lives at a magical school and is kind of like waiting for her magical powers to emerge, right?
Yeah.
And the same with Certainty. Like she has a quiet resilience to her that is really powerful, as she's kind of like waiting and hoping for her true magical powers to emerge. So why
Mm-hmm.
did you make that choice for this character instead of having her like fall into despair? She does have that resilience to her as she goes along.
Yeah, I love this question. I think the simple answer is just that despair is kind of a drag to write about. Or at least, I mean, despair can be very interesting, but like prolonged despair that is passive and inactive is just, not especially interesting of an arc and also not very cozy. But I also think it's just more universal to write about the character who persists. I think we're all more like Certainty than we think. We all face obstacles. I think we all face imposter syndrome in one way or another, whether in our author career or our professional career or social circles. But we still find ways to make do and kind of trudge on, and we try again and again. And there's something universal and deeply relatable in that inner battle that I find compelling to write about and to read about as well.
But it also kind of served as a source of tension for Certainty, as well as the story and the character as a whole. I mean, was that something that you just pleasantly discovered along the way that you were writing into your story? Or do you think about themes like that going in?
I think a little bit of both. So I am a discovery writer, which means I don't really like plot out the entirety of my books before I write them. My world building, I think I would generously describe as being vibes based. And so a lot of it is the characters in the story revealing itself to me as I'm drafting for the first time. And then I'll go and, later and kind of crisp up some arcs and make sure that the themes that I want to be conveyed are kind of resonating and through lines that are apparent throughout. But it's not that from the start I'm saying, okay, this is the story I'm going to tell, and this is the way I'm going to tell it in each of these segments, and this is the way in which this character will represent X and Y, this character will represent like A and B, and then they'll tie together at the 2/3 point, etc. I'm sure that system works for very many people. I haven't yet found a way to make it work for me. And so I think the way in which it's kind of a little both is that I knew a core theme of this book I wanted to be about figuring out how to define yourself and value yourself outside of external expectations. And so that is something that I think comes through both in Certainty's arc and in Aurelia's arc. Certainty is trying to live up to the promise and the hope of her family and provide for them. Aurelia, in a similar way, is kind of trying to do the same, just from a different angle and from the top down, where there's much heavier expectations, and she feels like there's this image of herself that she has to live up to, where Certainty is coming from, not having any of that kind of any of that image or that prestige already. And so the two kind of have to find their way both to the same ultimate goal through very different obstacles and journeys. But the how in which they're doing it was not premeditated necessarily.
It's all about the vibes. All about the vibes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into Aurelia a bit more, because I feel like this odd couple is really like the driving force of this story. So what can you tell us about Aurelia, who I can only describe as like cold and grumpy at first people, as she accompanies Certainty on her very first expedition?
Yeah, so Aurelia, like I mentioned before in the pitch, she is this kind of high-born daughter of high-up people at the royal court. And so she's kind of got a pedigree, and she's also a little bit of an academic prodigy in terms of how quickly she's advanced through the Guild of Mages. She's both a really strong spellcaster and has this like powerful, unique magical ability that everybody views as really prestigious. And so she's kind of lived her whole life with wealth, with privilege, and with the expectation that she's going to make something great out of herself. But what great means, I think, to her is defined a lot by the heavy weight of her parents' expectations, who view her almost more as like an asset for their family name than as a person unto herself. And that's a really difficult thing to grow up under. So I will say, I love my parents. I did not have an Aurelia-style childhood necessarily, but I did grow up under the shadow of really heavy academic expectations. My sister was like valedictorian and overachiever and, all those things. And so I wrote a little bit of that into Aurelia's story of what if you took that to an extreme and said, here's this girl who grew up never really knowing how to think of herself as anything other than the person who wins all the things and is going to rise really high and is full of potential that everybody expects them to live up to. And I think that would make you a pretty closed-off person. I think that would make you pretty cold and pretty focused on just those external signals of success and prestige. And, it's not necessarily her fault, I think, that she has grown up to be this person that, frankly, is not super likable at the beginning of the book and isn't very good at making social relationships or friendships because she's too focused on just kind of being the best and beating people when everybody else is focused on kind of just the journey and not necessarily destination. But I think she makes a really great foil to Certainty because Certainty is kind of the opposite. Certainty is warm and kind and empathetic and comes from humble roots. And to her, being in this world of prestige and this magical guild is a new and unfamiliar thing and something that she's trying desperately to prove that she belongs to, whereas Aurelia knows she belongs to and just has to prove that she believes or has to prove that she deserves to still be seen as kind of this like overachiever that she's always been in. And in the book pretty early on, Aurelia is described by other characters who don't know her very well as an ice queen, as sort of her kind of, put down nickname derogatory term in this magical school because there are going to be bullies and gossip.
It was like straight up. It was like Mean Girls meets
It was
Magic.
a little bit magical Mean Girls. Yeah. Yeah. But it's like, what if the mean girl isn't really mean at heart? Or what if she has reasons to be mean? And what if you can kind of teach the meanness out of that girl and help melt her icy exterior and draw her out of herself? And so that was kind of the relationship between Certainty and Aurelia that I wanted to play with. They're both good for each other, I think, in very different ways. And like I mentioned, they go on similar journeys from opposite angles and kind of meet in the same place, which I think was really lovely to get to write about.
Yeah. And I think that character arc for Aurelia in particular, you really handled it masterfully, because a lot of times you don't kind of look deeper
Mm.
at the Ice Queen character. You just kind of let them be the villain and say, screw this person, they suck.
Nobody wants to dig deeper into Regina's true psyche.
Yeah. So do you have any advice out there for writers who maybe are struggling to really capture the emotional, like, interiority of the
Mm.
characters that they have written into their worlds?
Yeah. I'm really pleased to hear you say that, so thank you, because one of my niggling worries when I was drafting this book was whether and how I could capture Aurelia's internality well enough without writing the book in a dual point of view. So, Keeper is written entirely in close third from Certainty's point of view, and I wanted to balance lifting the curtain and giving readers like an increasing visibility and understanding of Aurelia's character while letting that feel authentic and natural, and not like I'm just shoehorning and shoving her, her deepest feelings in front of them, as Certainty learns more about Aurelia and, as they get closer as characters. In terms of advice for capturing that internality and that emotion, I think one of my favorite approaches, and it's just one of many, I think there are, lots of ways to do this, but one of my favorite approaches to revealing who a character is showing how they react to things, how they react to other characters, how they react to situations they're put in, obstacles that they face. I think there's a pretty rich world of story to tell in those reactions. And the more specific and personal to the character they are, the better. And especially when those reactions are unexpected or surprising in some way, different from how you might expect the character to react. Those, I think, can be especially revealing moments, especially if you use them sparingly.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the cool things in this story is that you gave Certainty and Aurelia like very specific magical powers on very different ends of like the magical spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
And those magical powers allowed them to react to certain things in ways that were very unique to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool that even though these people have magic, everyone's kind of got their niche. So
Yeah.
how did you settle on like what their powers were going to be without making them like stereotypically OP or anything like that, but also using their magical powers to further enhance the contrast between these two characters?
That's a really great question. So I think multi-part answer. One is just what would be fun to write about. And so the concept of having these minorly magical artifacts that are sort of like everyday artifacts causing chaos was one of the original seeds for this story. And it just felt natural to have Certainty be able to talk to those artifacts. And like, what conversation would a magical quilt have with you if you could talk to the quilt? Was just like a fun digression. And, I was like, oh, I wonder if I could make a book out of this. Turns out I could. But it's also a little bit metaphorical, I think. So Certainty, who is great at humans and relating to humans and engaging with people and, wearing down Aurelia's icy exterior, it's a little bit ironic that her magical ability is that she can talk to things. But maybe that's because she's kind of, it's a metaphor for her ability to see the humanity in everyone and everything, regardless of kind of their background and what they are and what people see them as. To her, like a milk jug is not just a milk jug. It's kind of its own person that has its own wants and its own motivations that she can be able to tap into and convince to do non-milk jug like things. Sorry, that was a really bad example. I promise there's more than just milk jugs in here. But then Aurelia, who I think has had such difficulty forming relationships with people and kind of is kept at a distance from her peers, it's a little bit ironic that her magical ability is the ability to communicate with people over long distances. The far speaking is the name of her magical power. And so, like, the magic abilities, I think we're both, okay, what would be fun to write about? What suits the world building and the plot and this conceit of having minorly magical artifacts that are running amok in this farming village? But also, how can I use these abilities as a way to kind of draw out and reflect as a mirror the flaws of these characters and the journeys that they're going on?
Yeah,
I love that. That's so good. And you mentioned spelling before, and we have to talk about your world building and the setting as a whole, because it's something that's so special, I think, about cozy fantasy.
it made me chuckle every single time I read spelling. I was just like, my brain was like, this shouldn't work. It shouldn't work.
Really, Adrian, I was optimizing for you and how much we lisp when we're talking about it on podcasts.
Yeah, thank you.
It's
Thank
perfect.
you so much.
Well, tell us more about your diamond in the rough village and why you just had to make this the setting for Certainty and Aurelia's story.
Yeah, so The Teller of Small Fortunes is a bit of a travelogue. It's very much a adventuring party kind of travels across the kingdom on a journey with a ton of different locales, and it had everything from busy port towns to mountain outposts and caves and nunneries and a grand capital city. And for Keeper, I wanted to very much set the story in one place. I was like, let's not have to figure out how many miles or kilometers a horse and a wagon can travel.
Oh my gosh, it's the nightmare of all fantasy authors.
Yes, so bad at distance and geographies. And I was like, all right, let's put everybody in one place. And so I think how I came up with spelling was a lot of different influences. So for me, going back to the world of video games, there's this trope of kind of building up a community around you. You know, you start with like a ramshackle camp, and then you get some followers and some party members, and then like you build a town hall, and then you build a marketplace, and the city kind of gets developed around you. And to me, that was always one of the most satisfying parts of the game. Like in Civilization, I can do without the wars and the militaries. Just let me like build my little cities with all their little like wonders of the world.
Did you ever play the Harvest Moon games?
I did. I love Harvest Moon.
That was my vibe when reading this. It was like, this feels like Harvest Moon, and I fucking love it.
Thank you. That is such high praise, Adrian. Yeah. Harvest Moon, Stardew Valley, those sorts of games, Animal Crossing, I think inspired not the plot of the book in any way, but like the feeling of it, of coming home, of making your own home in this kind of out of the way place. To see something start, you know, rough and in disrepair and unloved, and turn that into something warm and thriving and, you know, a living community. I think that just appeals to like the caveman, cave woman inside of all of us, who figured out that by banding together and working together, surviving gets a lot easier. And maybe the mammoths and the, you know, lions won't kill you. But also, it's not just about surviving. It's like life becomes more meaningful when you're doing it with other people. And so this mimics that. And so the Village of Spelling, it felt right to have something kind of small and unloved and in disrepair that they get to work together to turn into this thriving community. And I do want to say there's one aspect of spelling that I did take shamelessly from real life. I live in San Francisco, in the Bay Area. There's a town sort of nearish here, maybe like 30 minutes away across the bridge, called Gilroy. Have you guys heard of it?
No.
Okay.
No.
So Gilroy, California, pretty unremarkable, nice town from everything I understand. The one thing that kind of puts it on the map, it has an annual garlic festival. It's a farming, you know, town. It grows a lot of garlic, and they figured out that if they throw a garlic festival every year, that's a really good way for the farmers to try to sell some of this excess garlic.
Nice.
And so every year when you drive on the interstate near Gilroy, there's this overwhelming whiff of like garlic everything. It doesn't matter if your car windows are closed or not. It doesn't matter if you've got the filter on. You will be garlic flavored by the time you get home.
Wow.
And it's kind of wonderful. They've got like garlic mashed potatoes and garlic ice cream and like garlic chocolate. And
No, not garlic ice cream. No.
Yes, garlic ice cream.
Wow.
You have to come try it, Adrian. It's better than you think.
Okay.
Random garlic story. When I have a sister who's 8 years older
I
than
love
me.
this tangent. Let's
She convinced me that if I ate garlic, it would keep mosquitoes away. So she made me a peanut butter and garlic sandwich and said,
no.
Greta, if you eat this, I swear the mosquitoes. And for an entire summer, like every day, I was eating peanut butter and garlic sandwiches.
How the fuck did your parents not
they
do
taste
something
It
about
was the
this?
90s. They weren't there. We were latchkey kids.
Like some fucking garlic mouth latchkey girl.
Yeah.
Wait, was this like raw garlic, Greta?
No, like powdered garlic.
Oh,
like-
garlic powder.
At least it was just garlic powder. If it was raw
Yeah,
garlic, that would be
I was gonna say like maybe if you toast it in some olive oil and throw in some
Yeah.
chili flakes, I could see it.
Like,
But
Put me peanut butter and whatever garlic powder.
that is
we
also
had.
like the most like
Probably, like,
Midwest thing
10
ever.
years old.
Just throw some garlic on your peanut butter.
I don't know. Was there mayonnaise? I think it doesn't count if there wasn't mayonnaise.
It's
Yeah,
true.
there
No,
used to be
it would be
mayonnaise.
salad. It wouldn't be a sandwich.
Oh my god! So Gilroy, the hometown of garlic. I mean, at least it starts with a G, so they can get some alliteration going on there.
That's true. That's true.
All right, everyone, we're gonna do it. We're gonna go to Gilroy. We're gonna eat some garlic. We're gonna smell like shit, but it's gonna be a fun time.
Love it.
But I love spelling because it was like this little town was like a microcosm representative of so much of like the broader history of the world. Like spelling has its own history, and that ties into like the power dynamics, the politics, the role of magic in the world. So how did you utilize spelling to not only evoke what was going on in the village, but evoke stuff that is going on in the broader world.
Yeah. So I'm always a really big fan when books use place as kind of its own character. And I feel like it can add so much in terms of the ambiance, but like you're saying, the understanding of the broader world. And it's a really convenient way to do that without having like info dumpy paragraphs of exposition on like, and now we will proceed through the military history of the Kingdom of Ashera the last 2 centuries. You can kind of instead reveal it piece by piece in the way that the characters talk about the place, in certain like physical aspects of the place. Like, I don't think this is spoiling things too much to say that Spelling is the most unmagical place in the kingdom because of an incident that happened in a magical war a long time ago that sort of drained the magic from the land. And so I think it was just, if I treat it like a character, and in the same way that when you introduce a new character, you learn about them kind of piece by piece in the way that they interact with your main character and in kind of their conversations and their actions, let the village do that too. And so Spelling was a really, I think, like you see it go through its own arc in the same way that Certainty goes through an arc, in the same way that Aurelia goes through an arc. And it's both a way to kind of peel back the surface of the world a little bit and say, hey, there is a history beyond that. I'm not going to go into detail on what it is. You'll just see what little you see of it from the outside. But also look at how this is changing over time as the characters interact with it and as it interacts with the characters.
Yeah.
And there's so many fun people who live in Spelling. You have like just a quirky cast of secondary characters. And, you know, we mentioned Dragon Cat earlier, but Schrodinger's magical cat.
Schrodinger's cat, man.
Do you have any particular side characters that you just found leapt off the page for you? And what made their perspective and actions so vital to the larger story that you were telling?
Yeah. So one of my favorite side characters to write is Hope the Cat Dragon. The cat dragon gets its own brief point of view interlude, and I think I just always enjoy writing animals because I feel like they can express so much with no words. Maybe that's just coming as a pet owner, and my dog looks at me with these like deeply human eyes, and there's like one small noise or like wag of her tail, and it's like saying a whole lot. And so getting to write from the point of view of a cat dragon was very fun because cats are just agents of chaos, as we all know. And if you give one wings and the ability to fly, oh God, like, yes. But the actual side characters beyond the dragon or the cat dragon that I especially enjoyed writing were, I think the High Mage has always been a favorite of mine. So the High Mage, I will say, is the one character who shows up in both the Teller of Small Fortunes and the Keeper of Magical Things. And I think it was really just me selfishly enjoying the High Mage so much, even though she was a fairly small character in the Teller of Small Fortunes, that I wanted to bring her back in the second book and explore just a tiny bit more of her world and the Guild of Mages, because we only see one side of what the Guild of Mages looks like from the outside in the Teller of Small Fortunes from Tao's point of view. But I just love that she's such a no-nonsense, frighteningly competent, successful older woman that everybody looks up to and that just brooks no bullshit from anyone and kind of, runs the kingdom secretly or not so secretly. And very much, I guess, like her, I guess it's not surprising that my next favorite side character to write was Gertha, who I think is basically the High Mage if the High Mage were not the High Mage. Gertha is kind of like the village boss lady who is, again, brooks no bullshit, will tell people what it is to their face, thinks that all people kind of suck, except for like a few individual persons that she has decided are allowed to be graced with the honor of her presence. And writing someone just cranky and no nonsense is very fun.
Before we close out, we always like to do a little two-parter. So if you could give listeners and viewers a good bit of soundbite writing advice, and then B, tell us a weird or random fact that you find to be utterly fascinating.
I love this so much. Okay, so A, soundbite writing advice. I would say read as much as you possibly can, as widely as you can. I think reading counts as writing, in my view, because it ultimately makes you a better writer. B, weird, interesting fact. I don't know. Maybe a previous guest has discussed this already, but I love the fact that wombats poop in cubes.
I don't know.
I don't know if anyone's ever said that.
Okay, I'm glad, because I thought this was fairly common knowledge, but it's still my favorite fact. They do this so that it doesn't like roll down a hill and they can use it as little territory markers. But anyway.
How the hell do their bowels create cubes?
I don't know, but I love it. I'm just picturing like a Lego distribution system inside there,
Also, whoever wrote Everybody Poops, because that was a whole book in my house
Yeah,
a
I was
couple years
just
ago.
about
Like,
to say
how
that,
is
Greta.
that not in this book?
I was just about to say that. I was like, man, I've been reading Everyone Poops with my son for years.
And they never
Where is
mentioned
the square poop?
I know. I'm gonna have to
I'm a-
write like a cozy children's fantasy book about a wombat whose cubic poop is central to saving the kingdom.
You know what? We need to talk to T. Kingfisher about this
Yes,
because
yeah.
she has a children's comic book about. I think there's like a wombat in like that she like did illustrations and stuff of. So
I'm
be like,
sure she knows.
tell me
She's
all
Red
you know.
Wombat, right?
Tell me all you know about this like Pez dispenser animal.
Amazing.
Oh my God, that's fantastic. Well, Julie, thank you so much for chatting with Greta and I today. It's been honestly like so much fun, and we really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
As well, if you contribute $5 or more to our Patreon, you can access an exclusive reading by Julie from her new novel, The Keeper of Magical Things. So go check that out. Go get that book. It's awesome. Go get the Teller as well, and just support Julie's work. She's a fantastic writer. And Julie, if you could please let everyone know where they can find you online.
Oh, yes. Hiding Under a Rock, but also at Julie Leong Books on Instagram and, gosh, I don't know, probably everywhere else too. And julieleong.com.
Awesome. And you can follow SFF Addicts across the board at SFF Addicts Pod. You can follow me at Adrian M. Gibson. You can go check out my book, Mushroom Blues, if you want a little bit of fungal noir in your life. Greta, what about you?
Yeah, you can find me at GretaKKelly.com as well as at Greta K. Kelly, all across all the things, mostly Instagram and TikTok these days. And all of my books, including The Queen of Days, are out now, but go check out Queen of Days if you want to see what would happen if your D&D crew decided to fight a fallen god with nothing but banter and unearned confidence.
Oh, that's such a good pitch.
And go support MJ, go get her books, give those cats a little bit more fat. And thank you all so much for listening. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned next week for our part 2 with Julie from our writing masterclass on writing cozy fantasy. We're very excited for that. Until then, keep reading, keep imagining, and we'll see you next time on SFF Addicts.